Hey guys, welcome back to Car Culture TV, or as we like to call it, CCTV. I'm Aryan,
And I'm Audit.
and in today's lovely podcast, we have a wonderful arrangement of segments for you guys. We'll start off with the weekly news in the automotive world with Speed Trap. Then we'll move on to a new segment we like to call Car Roast, and we'll discuss one of the most, let's say, interesting cars of our time. And then we'll finally finish with That'll Buff Right Out, where we'll discuss one of the most atrocious car mods I think we've seen in recent years. So now, let's get into Speed Trap. In this week's episode of Speed Trap, the first thing we're going to discuss is the brand new Volvo Polestar 2. What are your thoughts on that?
So when I first heard that Volvo was going to be making an electric car, I was shook. I
Yeah,
just didn't
for sure.
expect, this relatively small in terms of size company to be putting out an electric car as fast as they have.
Yeah, and when you think of like the market of vehicles, Volvo is like one of the last things you think of. It comes like in the back of your head.
Right, and a lot of people, they think it's German. They don't even realize that it's a Swedish car maker. People only think of IKEA when they think of Volvo.
Yeah.
And the other thing is Polestar 2.
Yeah, that was the one interesting thing. So I know many of you guys might know as well that Volvo is like, Polestar is like a trim that Volvos have, like the S60 Polestar. And it was weird to see that their electric car brand was going to be almost like a separate company with the Polestar name.
Yeah, so there's a lot of design elements that go into the car. You can see that Polaris star that was very specific to Polestar's trim now being the front badge on the car. If you look at the car itself, there's actually no Volvo logos around the vehicle.
Which I find pretty interesting that, it's almost like they don't want it to be associated with the brand.
Yeah, and actually, there's a large Chinese backing to Volvo now as a
Oh.
car company. And so they've kind of made this push to transition to their performance division and their electric division specifically, calling it Polestar. And now we're seeing the Polestar 1 being, a relative success. We're seeing the Polestar 2 coming out.
Okay. And then, so obviously this is designed to be a Model 3 competitor, right? Because the Polestar 1 is more of that like luxurious Model S competitor. And this is supposed to be the smaller, more economic choice. But what's really interesting is the starting price of this car is $60,000.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. As we know, the Model 3, the base versions still available even in China,
Yep.
are around $35,000.
Exactly.
US dollars.
Quite affordable for like a family who just wants to like reach out of their budget just to get their first electric car.
Right, and electric cars are expensive, but that being said, $35,000, considering the technology you're getting, the autopilot, things like that, it's definitely a great way to kind of get your feet wet without really stretching out that dollar, that budget that you have in the bank account. And then Polestar 2 comes out, and it's $60,000 starting price.
So, I'd like to say that we don't know too much about this vehicle. We just know the price and like what it offers, and we don't know exactly everything it offers.
Right.
But still, when you compare it, the Model 3 offers a lot at $35K. So it's puzzling to think what they might offer for $60K starting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, right? Like, as you mentioned, we don't know a lot about the trim levels. We don't know a lot about the power outputs, the 0 to 60, or even the range, which is one of the biggest factors.
Yeah.
But just looking at the car straight off the bat in terms of size, in terms of leg room, in terms of space, it's definitely a Model 3 spec.
It's smaller than it's not like a full size sedan. You can tell, and it has a larger roof, which is interesting. When I first saw this car, I thought maybe a crossover kind of vibe is what it was giving, but it actually is a bit smaller. But yeah, it has a large roof, which I think is quite weird in terms of design.
And I will say, speaking on design, I think this car will tailor and be appreciated a lot more by the types of people that are fans of the more conventional car design.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you look at the Model 3, it's very much from the future, very different in terms of size,
it's a
shape, and
Tesla.
proportions. Exactly. But with the Polestar and even the Polestar 2, you're seeing a normal front grille. You're seeing those classic Thor's hammer type headlights. That's really the signature for the brand. And you're seeing a very stereotypically looking normal car. If this car was driving by you and it was making a sound,
Yeah.
you would think a gas car.
It really doesn't scream electric car. It just screams normal Volvo. It really does share that like Volvo design that they've come to develop in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And so while they don't want to affiliate it with Volvo at all, you will recognize that it's very much Volvo, but it's a Polestar. In terms of looks, it's not like your Tesla in terms
Yeah.
of very futuristic modern design. Instead, it's that traditional car.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting that they're trying to compete with the Model 3 with that interesting starting price. But when you think about starting price in electric cars, another name that usually people think of is the newer Porsche Taycan. So like the new one, obviously it was a Model S competitor. It's a bit more pricey, and performance, it's equal. Some say it's even better, the newest version, but they are working on a cheaper version. So what do you think about that?
So the Taycan kind of took the world by storm when it came out.
Yeah,
It was really the first successful electric car to come out and take a real shot at Tesla.
exactly. Yeah.
And so with that, you kind of saw the performance because Porsche is really renowned for their chassis and their track work. But then there were a lot more of those real life, day to day luxury features coming in as well. One thing that the Taycan was really hurt by was the range, right? I mean, still comparing it to the top of the line Model S, which is its direct competitor, you're seeing that this doesn't top out while the Model S is now getting close to reaching that 400-mile mark.
Yeah.
The Taycan is typically averaging around 270 to 300. And so while Porsche is still working on their battery technology, it's definitely good to see that they are working on a quote unquote entry level Taycan.
Exactly.
The normal Taycans start in the six figures. They start around
Yeah.
100.
They're pretty expensive, and it's not a competitor for the base level Model S. It's definitely for the P100D that it competes with.
And now instead you're seeing the Taycan starting at a much lower, probably around $60,000 to $80,000
Exactly.
mark.
But once again, it shows that like even when these big companies like Volvo and Porsche, they're trying to make entry level electric cars, but both of them start at 30,000 almost above the base level Tesla Model 3.
Right, and you could argue that, both of those companies, Volvo and Porsche, are typically luxury brand companies, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, even Tesla, when they came out, they were a luxury brand company.
Exactly. The Roadster and the Model S were not common cars, especially the Roadster.
And unlike a lot of different other luxury brand companies, such as Cadillac or even Lincoln, these two car manufacturers, Porsche and Volvo, don't have a lower trim brand that they can kind of offset that electric car to. So if they really want to work on making an accessible electric car to enter the field, then really these are their best shots.
Yeah, I think Volvo can stick to what they're doing, but I think for Porsche, since they are in a business group with Audi and Volkswagen, then I think their entry level business car or entry level electric car will probably come between those brands. It's probably not Porsche themselves, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Porsche kind of does get to be part of that Volkswagen Group umbrella.
Yeah.
And so you definitely have been seeing Volkswagen doing a lot of electric work, and they definitely
Yeah.
do share those two platforms.
So now let's move into the Ford Mustang GT350. So unfortunately, we've had some news about this car that it is going to be discontinued soon.
Yeah, so when I first heard that, I was honestly pretty upset.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Shelby GT350. Like you mentioned, it's based on the Mustang chassis, but it's basically a Mustang on rails in
Yeah.
terms of it's souped up. It's got a better engine with more power, better brakes, better performance, better aero. And it really was harnessing what it meant to drive a Mustang. And for it to be kind of that relatively, quote unquote, again, entry level type of real performance vehicle, right? This is a Shelby.
Yeah.
And typically, you always saw the Shelby 500 or the upper trims.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing, wow, this is kind of an accessible, at least somewhat accessible Shelby.
Yeah. So the starting price when it was new was around 60K. And luckily for people who are looking into the used car market, you can buy one of these for maybe like 2 years old with pretty low miles for maybe like, what, 35K, would you say?
Yeah, I think nowadays you're seeing them for around 30 to 40, tops 45K, and you're getting an almost new, relatively low mileage car. And if you're getting maybe a 2018 one, then you can get it with dual clutch transmission. But for all the other years, they've stuck to that classic manual.
The 6-speed manual. So the question is, now that it's getting discontinued, do you think this car has the potential to be a true like collector's car in the future?
I could definitely see it. Ford has had a long history of, designing collectors' vehicles. We look at the classic Mustangs, the Mach 1, the Bullet. Some of these cars are worth millions of dollars today. And I could definitely see, especially GT350 with this classic type of coloring, right? The typical blue with the white stripes. It's iconic. It's well taken care of. It's, been maintained well. And it's got that 6-speed manual. I could definitely see that gaining a lot of value down the road.
I think that especially because, we've talked about electric cars quite recently, and the whole ideas of manuals, I think almost all manuals with good performance are probably going to stick around and become collector's cars, just because we don't see that many manual cars anymore in general.
And, combine that with the new emissions regulations coming out,
Yeah.
a lot of the different rules, and a lot of the manufacturers transitioning to those twin turbocharged V6s. Honestly, we're going to see the V8 start to decline, or we're going to start to see a loss in a lot of these cars that make that big grunt, make that huge sound, and have a lot of that power.
Yeah. I think for sure that people are probably gonna, if they buy this car now for maybe 33,000, I could definitely see in a few years that this car increases in value, especially if they have that 6-speed manual transmission in them.
Absolutely.
So, quite recently, Lawrence Stroll has become a majority shareholder in Aston Martin. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. So Lawrence Stroll is a very famous and renowned Canadian business industrialist. He actually made most of his money from the fashion industry, but he's always had a huge racing passion. As you know, his son Lance races in Formula One, and he funds that team as well. And now it's interesting to see Lawrence Stroll making that move over and actually buying a major holding stake in Aston Martin and actually taking leadership of the organization.
So obviously this will have a change for Lawrence Stroll's like F1 dealings. But what does this say for the company for like that makes just the cars themselves?
So in the past few years, unfortunately, we've actually seen a little decline in Aston Martin. The company has been struggling a little bit with finances and funding, especially for the past couple of years. It was kind of Lawrence Stroll's saving grace jumping in and buying that majority stake. And I think we're going to see a huge turnaround in the company.
So one thing that they've been doing for the last couple of years is they've been using Mercedes AMG engines in their vehicles, and this has been a pretty good thing for them. I mean, they are true AMG engines. They have the plaque on the engine and everything. But if Lawrence Stroll becomes a majority, like now that he is, do you think that they may stop using those Mercedes engines?
So there have been rumors floating around in the industry that it's very possible that Aston Martin will be canceling their contract with Mercedes AMG. The question really then for me is, well, who are they going to use for the engines, right? Who is going to manufacture these engines? I'm pretty sure Aston Martin's not going to take the load onto themselves, especially not now when they're just kind of going through this renaissance, this rebirth. I really don't expect them to become a full outfit and a full engine manufacturer. I think they're still going to borrow it.
So personally, I think that my top pick for if they were to pick a new engine provider, probably Ford and Cosworth, because as you may know, a few years ago, Aston Martin was actually owned by Ford Motor Company, and they had Cosworth engines. If anyone's seen some of the old Vantages, they looked a lot like Mustangs from back in the day. So what do you think about Ford maybe becoming the new engine provider?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think even if we look back at something as simple as the Ford Fusion, that front grille is very reminiscent of that
Yes.
Aston Martin design. And, you know, that really does show that history that the company has had together. The interesting thing is, in relation to the Cosworth engine, so that UK outfit that specifically builds these performance engines, they've already built a couple engines with Cosworth, right? What was that car? The Valkyrie? Or
Yeah,
the.
yeah. The
Was
new
the.
Valkyrie and the Valhalla have been made in cooperation with the Red Bull F1 team and Cosworth.
Right, so that's going to be really exciting to see. It's really the coming together again of Cosworth. And you're right, that's actually a really good point. It may become time for Aston Martin to rebuild that relationship with Ford Cosworth and really transition completely to using their engines.
I think another big reason, and another reason I would love to see that is because Cosworth is a British company, and making the engine British and pseudo-American, but also British, and then having Aston Martin as a British company, it'll bring back that powerhouse of a British automobile manufacturer that they had some time ago.
Absolutely. And I was actually just looking recently at some of the postings that Aston Martin was delivering, and it seems that they plan on resuming production at their UK set factory pretty soon, specifically of their DBX, their new performance SUV.
That's actually it's pretty interesting. I do you think that the DBX engine might be altered as the car isn't actually out yet?
Yeah, it's very possible, but I really doubt it because typically with these manufacturers, what they're doing is they're placing these supply orders and these contracts well ahead of time. If they're getting ready to start manufacturing, it's very possible that they already have that deal. But that's not to say that down the road with future models and future additions and trims that they might be using a different type of engine, with, such as the Cosworth.
I think we'll definitely have to keep a keen eye on Aston Martin in the future to see what they're going to do because they have some. They're as a car company, they have some interesting ideas, and their design philosophy is really good. So hopefully they'll get an engine that'll match that beautiful design, and we'll get to see them become an even better company in the future. Now we're going to move into our newest segment, Car Roast. So in this week's episode of Car Roast, we're going to be discussing the Nissan Juke. I'd say there's a conversation to be had about style.
Yeah, since the minute the Nissan Juke came out, I have hated every single part of this car. I have hated it from every single angle, from top, from bottom, from side to side. It is one of the ugliest creations and does not deserve to be on the road.
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely some interesting choices. For starters, the two big circle headlights right there. Those are pretty interesting. And then, I mean, the main headlights that bulge out, well, they're not the greatest.
Right, so in a funny way, actually, Nissan was one of the first and early companies to do this kind of split design of having the specific headlight, the accent headlight, separated from the main body actual illuminating headlights. And unfortunately, they did not set off on the right foot. It's one of the ugliest things I've seen. Since then, I've seen a lot of manufacturers actually do a pretty decent job, but the Nissan Juke was a train wreck.
So yeah, since then, I mean, that concept of separating those front headlights, it has caught on, and most cars do that. But I mean, yeah, even beyond the headlights, you just look at the car and just like the overall shape and the cuts where they are, like the lines, they just seem like they don't match.
Right, it was kind of a mess. It was like a car in the middle of an identity crisis. It was like, who am I as a car,
Yeah.
right? In a lot of ways, it was, oh, I'm a hatchback. I deserve to have a normal hatch trunk and a swooping rear. But then on the other side, it was like, well, wait. No, I'm a crossover. I need to actually be an off-roader. I need to have suspension height. I need to have this really weird handle on the back door that's built into the window frame. That's what I really need.
So yeah, I think really early on they realized that yeah, there was a big design problem with this car. So Nissan did try to do some things to make it less of a problem, including their color customization package, in which people could customize almost the color of every single part in the car. And well, their primary designs were somewhat interesting.
And almost immediately with that, the car that I didn't think could get any worse got more worse,
I don't know,
if that's
just-
even possible. It got so much worse. If you look at this thing, right, you've got yellow wheels, a yellow trim on the bottom, yellow mirror, and yellow useless spoiler in the top back, and then the rest of the car is navy blue. It looks like it belongs in a circus.
It's weird, right? Because this was just to showcase that they were offering this color trim package. Yet this is one of the cars they chose to show us this is one of the things you could do with such a package, and it was supposed to be their good looking package. And well, it clearly didn't turn out that way. Like the where the accent colors are just makes no sense.
Yeah, and honestly, like it must have been a really dark time over in Nissan marketing, over in Nissan design. It seems like they were struggling. Maybe they hadn't paid the electricity bill, so they couldn't really see the design very well. I don't know what their problem was, but this was the Nissan designer sitting over there in Japan, struggling to see what he was drawing, struggling to see what he was painting, and then somehow someone accidentally made it. It was like a mechanic was like, "Oh, a Nissan. Oh, okay. I guess we'll manufacture it." And this came out.
And then yeah, like going back to the design, just another thing that like it doesn't look like any other Nissan they have. If you look at Nissans now, they all have like similar front headlights, and they look like if you see Nissan, you know it's a Nissan, even if they took off the badges. Not a single Nissan, actually, not a single car looks like this on the road.
Right. And normally you would think, wow, I have a car that stands out, right? You look at a Ferrari, it's like, okay, not a single car around it will look anything as cool as it is. This was cool in the wrong way, as in not cool. This thing came out and it was, what are we looking at? Why does it not look like anything on the road? But not in a good way. It was like it doesn't look like anything on the road. Maybe you should drive it off a cliff because it has no place on the road.
Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, it didn't get the best reception. And well, so it was a turbocharged inline 4 and it made about 188 horsepower, but one thing I always thought was annoying. So they tried to make it a hatchback, but also like a crossover. I think they tried to lean in more to the crossover area, as you can see by like the ride height. But it's only offered in front wheel drive.
Here's what I think Nissan did when they were making the Juke. They took two groups of kindergartners, gave one group a mechanical engineering degree, and told them to work on the front of the car, build the engine, build the drivetrain, and only look at the front of the car. And then they got the other people over from their racing division and said, why don't you go make the back of the car? So they threw on a spoiler, they threw on those long trim lights, and then they were like, wait, copy, paste, cut, merge, here we go. And now what we see is a child's drawing of a car in the front and a child's drawing of a car in the back, just that one decided that they like circles more and the other one prioritized downforce.
And then another bad thing, this is more about Nissan cars in general, but this car having it definitely doesn't help. It does have, on the standard model, a CVT.
The worst transition known to man.
Yep.
If you can even call it a transmission.
Yeah, but I mean, some people say that there are some redeeming qualities about the Juke. For example, they made an Nismo version, and okay, look, beyond looks, it does have a 6-speed manual transmission, which is nice, and it does make up to 215 horsepower, which is a bit of a tune-over. And I mean, look, in a car this small, a 6-speed manual with that much horsepower, it may be fun to drive.
Yeah, again, this was another reach by Nissan's marketing division to say, how can we make this car cooler? Well, we've already got this really cool design. We've already got this really cool customized paint scheme option. Let's make it extra cool by slapping on a Nismo badge, a little bit of horsepower, and now a lot more people will be buying it. Just that we're going to have to charge you maybe like $10,000 more for it.
Yeah, I think, look, when you add a Nismo trim to a car and you make it a little bit sportier, it should be a car that people want to pay more for. But I don't think I could see anyone saying, yeah, I want to pay $10,000 for a Nissan Juke.
And you're thinking of the kind of people that are buying this car, right? They're not looking to go take this car out on a track. They just want to go get groceries from Kroger and Walmart.
Exactly.
Now you're giving them a Nismo version and saying, yes, this more horsepower will really change the way you use this car. And it won't.
Yeah, I really don't know what they were thinking. And you know what? I think they realized that people didn't really like it here in the States. So they did discontinue it in the United States.
Thankfully.
And they discontinued it nationwide for a few years. But now, in everywhere except the United States, the Nissan Juke has returned.
Honestly, this is one of the best things since sliced bread. No, I'm kidding. It's actually one of the worst things I've ever seen. Honestly, what they've done is they've taken the original Juke design, they've given it to some artist that likes to draw futuristic things and said, make it better. That artist quit, and then they found the same kindergarten that had grown up and gone to fifth grade and said, draw this, and he did it again.
Well, look, okay, there's some redeeming qualities here. The headlights are better. They don't bulge out anymore. And, I mean, yeah, they kept the big circle headlights in the front as well, but the front grille is better, and, I mean, it looks sleeker, and design-wise, it's okay.
Nissan has always been one of those companies that has struggled in a lot of ways with some of its design to keep up with the times. But now we're seeing a lot of the other cars like the Ultima and the Murano and even the Maxima actually looking really cool, whereas the Juke has struggled to keep up. The one redeeming quality that they've done with this car is not released it in America.
Yeah, I mean, some people have said that they want this car here, but I really don't think they do. And if you think about similar cars, the Toyota CHR, it has a somewhat similar design, and it didn't do so hot here either.
Honestly, I think this was one of those cases of these foreign car companies kind of competing with one another, right? Nissan put out the Juke. Toyota was like, let's put out the CHR, right? They were just fighting back and forth, and they both didn't take a minute to stop and think, oh, why are we doing this again? Why are we making this car? And that kind of reflects on the sales. These cars have not done that well. Nissan has replaced the Juke in the States with the Kicks, and that's doing significantly better.
Yeah, the Kicks is definitely a much better replacement, and it definitely is better as far as design goes. It looks like a Nissan, but once again, they made a pretty polarizing car for the 2020 model that luckily isn't here in the States.
Yeah, my one recommendation to Nissan is fire whoever designed this, and please, please, please have someone else design a car for you.
Well, there you have it, Nissan. If you can manage to figure out your Juke problems in midst of, well, your other problems, then I think we should be set. Now we're going to move on into another new segment we like to call That'll Buff Right Out.
Oh my god.
So in the car world, when we normally say that'll buff right out, it's basically because it won't. It's basically because we've created some serious damage and there is no saving it. In this segment, we'd like to kind of focus on those car mods that won't buff right out.
So in today's episode, we'll be discussing, this. Will that buff right out?
You can try to change those tires, but your place in society, that's not going to buff right out.
Yeah. Look, this is a Hummer with really, really small wheels, and this is a trend we're seeing quite a bit. Trucks with small wheels are kind of a thing. Now, although this is an over-exaggeration, in Hawaii, this is pretty commonplace to do with your truck, as you can see by these two pictures. They're always trying to raise their Toyota Tacomas, always like a couple years used, and they put small tires on them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of see this coming together of, pretty expensive lift kits, maybe $1,200 to $1,500 for these basic lift kits, and then putting these very small tires on them.
Yeah, it's almost like a Frankenstein of a car, and you gotta have some concerns for safety here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it looks like these cars, especially on the roads of Hawaii, are going to roll over at any minute.
Oh yeah, I feel like they'll try to turn to a parking spot and then roll over and crush, hopefully, a Nissan Juke.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, why are you doing this? Who told you this was a good idea? And honestly, why is it part of car culture?
I don't know. I think, so we visited Hawaii, and I think I saw one of these every maybe 5 seconds, and I don't know why. It just everyone there just seems to want to have this kind of truck. There's no utility for it. You can't go off roading in a truck like that because it'll just tip over.
Yeah, there's a lot of car and tuner movements around the world. A lot of different styles of modding your car, especially aesthetically, right? We're talking about low riders and different types of cars. This should not belong.
Yeah, and like it's not just in Hawaii. They have examples otherwheres, and they look just like this. Where I mean, you may not lift it as much, but the small wheels, like I don't see any benefit to keeping them that small.
That's one of my biggest issues with this type of design, right? A lot of car mods, they make sense. A lot of tuner culture, right? It's a way of expression. It's a means of expression, and it's also a way that increases the functionality of the car in some way. Maybe, you have a lower center of gravity. It's better for racing, or it just looks plain cool. This doesn't really look that cool. And in terms of functionality, honestly, this truck looks like it's more likely to tip over. And on top of that, with those small rubber band tires you have, you're really feeling every single bump in the road. And now you've lost the off-road capabilities of the car as well.
And then like the thing about the small tires, like you had a question, how is it holding up the weight of the truck with that fragile of a base?
Yeah, the suspension definitely ends up doing a lot more work. And you actually have to put in a lot of effort and money to make your car look like this.
Yeah.
And so I don't really understand that at the end of the day. Aesthetically, it's not really working. It seems like you just want to kind of advertise small appendages.
Also, I'd I'd also like to add that unless you're a tall person, getting into this car, it's not gonna be the best.
Right. Again, going back to that practicality, you're having trouble driving this car off-road and on the road. You're feeling potholes and you can't go over hills. You're having trouble getting into the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also actually hurting your fuel MPG. You're actually hurting the range that you have. And as a truck owner, it's already bad enough. I mean, that thing is called a gas guzzler for a reason. When you lift a truck like this and you add really tiny tires, you're reducing the aero profile in the vehicle and you're actually burning more gas.
And you're definitely not doing anything for your manlyhood when you have to pull out your stepping stool from the trunk and use it to get inside of your car. So that is all we have for today's episode of CCTV Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to watch our previous video for more car culture. Also, you can now find an audio version of our podcast at Spotify and Anchor.fm. The link for that will be in the description. And be sure to stay tuned for next week's podcast to keep up with car culture.
We're going to end this episode on a rather unfortunate note, bidding farewell to the cars we've already lost in 2020.
So sad. The Lexus GS.
Lost after a long battle against fake sports car-itis. The Mercedes GLC F-Cell.
Wait, they had a hydrogen car? The Volkswagen Beetle.
Shoulders everywhere rejoice due to diminishing returns on slug bugs. The Buick Regal.
Wait, it's a Buick? The Smart Fortwo.
Clearly, it was for no one.